Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. When I think about digital transformation, I see this digital tsunami crashing onto our shores, leaving nothing untouched in its wake. It is fast, it is powerful, and it is hugely disruptive. But unlike a real tsunami, this digital tsunami is also a creative force, making possible new capabilities, new businesses, and even new industries. The force driving the tsunami of change is, of course, software, now in its most powerful incarnation, artificial intelligence, AI. Our themes for today will focus on this duality, this tension between creation and destruction, the splendor and the wonder that software, AI, and generative AI make possible, versus the risk and, yes, even the ruin. But let's start with the promise. It's a better place to start. Software, AI, has the potential to help humanity solve some of its toughest challenges, from global health equity, accessible high-quality education, environmental sustainability, and yes, even the products and services we consume every day. Digital technologies have the potential to unleash massive gains in productivity, making our society and the world a far richer place. And it is many of the companies in this room that are actually working on solving these difficult challenges. But we will not realize the benefits of this technology if we don't also manage the risks. And it is where all of us, and I mean literally all of us, have a role to play in making sure that the destructive effects of these new technologies do not come to pass if we are, in fact, to realize the promise. So we have a collective responsibility to ensure that this technology is used wisely and so we can live in a prosperous society. With that, let's take some examples of how companies are actually moving us forward in terms of coming up with these new solutions. There's a company called Verge Genomics. It's a young company. And they looked at some of the most difficult health problems that people face. One of them, for example, is ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a horrible neurodegenerative disorder that ultimately ends in a fatality. And they looked at what had been going on and found that most trials, most efforts to find a solution had actually failed. They said, we need to reinvent from the ground up. We need to think about a new way in which we can tackle this horrible disease. And they decided to sort of start with a data-driven approach. They built a machine learning platform. It's a closed-loop machine learning platform. And their sort of secret sauce, they literally have cracked the code on this disease, was to look at 11.4 million data points, genomics data, protein data, live cell data from humans, put this entire database, it's in the hundreds of terabytes of data, that they analyzed, and they actually found a causal mechanism. They used this machine learning platform to discover a target. They used the target to work backwards to find a molecule that would attack that target, and that molecule is now in phase 2 clinical trials, all in 4 years. This is the power of reinvention. This is the power of thinking differently about what we can do with the technologies that are now available to us. A very, very different example. This is Boeing. This is their new MQ-28. There's only a handful in production. It's still making its way into the armed forces. It's also, by the way, called the ghost bat, which is a name I love because the ghost bat is actually a mammal that flies in groups to achieve their missions. Sort of somehow evolution has taught them that. What this plane is it's an uncrewed, basically it's a drone, faster. It's uncrewed, and it is trained to fly in teams, in formation. So imagine a fighter pilot being supported by what they call the loyal wingman, which is this drone. And it completely changes the equation of how we will defend ourselves against attack with this new strategy. You can't just deploy this technology. So what you can now do is you can swarm the enemy with perhaps one human and many more of these less expensive and no cost to human life jets that are actually uncrewed. So they're trained to fly in these very, very tight formations. It completely changes the equation in how we defend ourselves. It takes one more thing, though, because imagine being a pilot of one of these jets, and you look all around, and you see all of these, you're surrounded by these uncrewed jets, and it takes some nerve to fly at these high speeds in tight formation, and there's no pilot in any one of these. This is the one place where I will say labor substitution is actually a good thing, right? Because this is the one place where you say, yes, we lost some pilots' jobs, but I think and they can take hits that were targeted at human pilots. But this is what we are now able to do. It's a cheaper solution, it's a more effective solution, and these planes can do so much more because they're built with sensors for intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance. Completely reimagining global defense with technology. And then mass transit. With the challenges we have around the environment, I think it's really important that we sort of make transit, mass transit in particular, and we're already seeing evidence of this even in LA, believe it or not, this car crazy place that we live in. So how do we get to more comfortable, safer mass transit? You may or may not know this, but there is literally one fatality every 3 hours of a human sort of coming in, being hit by a train. Literally every 3 hours. So safety is paramount. This is a Hitachi train actually operating in Copenhagen, Denmark, and it is now coming to Washington, D.C. very shortly, and then to more cities around the US. But this train is robotic. It's self-driving, though I don't know if you can use that word for rails. It's safer. It's higher capacity, and it's more efficient. It's safer because it's built with fail-safe computer programming, remote monitoring, and it's an amazing ability to detect things around it. It's more efficient because the machines are the trains are programmed to make sure that they're accelerating at the optimal speeds, that they are braking at the optimal speeds, and because they can maintain the optimal distance between trains. So if you're a human driving, you're all taught in your California DMV handbook that you have to maintain so much distance between us and the car in front of us because of braking time. Machines don't have any of these delays, and so you can actually pack these trains closer together and be safer. So that allows you to increase capacity. So once again, they're safer, higher capacity, and more efficient. And this is sort of the solutions we're looking for, where we can achieve these things more cost effectively and yet higher value for those of us who choose to ride these trains. So I want to sort of spend a moment talking about why the potential of artificial intelligence is so high. All of the three examples that I use right now talk about the power of what the AI needs to learn. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the rate at which AlphaGo, the deep learning algorithm designed by the DeepMind division of Google, actually evolved. And you see that, you probably remember that there was this world-class Go player by the name of Lee Sedol, and in 2016, the earlier version of Alpha, it beat Lee Sedol, and a year later it beat a guy called KG, who was sort of then the world #1 player. And it beats them resoundingly. But they used earlier versions of the algorithm to actually beat these two players. Then they come up with the next version of the algorithm called AlphaGo, AlphaGo 0. And the difference between the first couple of models and this model was that those were trained on actual data, on playing games against humans, learning from humans. What they did with AlphaGo 0 was they actually learned, they didn't teach it very much at all. They just gave it the basics of the game, and it played games against itself. And in 40 days, it has surpassed the performance of the previous iterations of AlphaGo. And then they retired it. So it retired an unbeaten champion, if you want to call it that. But here's the power. It discovered new knowledge about the game. It discovered strategies that were not known to humans. It learned to beat the best human, which, by the way, Go is a 2,000-year-old game. Accumulated human knowledge over 2,000 years, and AlphaGo 0 achieved this in literally 40 days. And that is the power of what these systems can do. So this, people talk about where are the algorithmic gains coming from? Where's the improvements coming from? There's hardware improvements and there's algorithmic improvement. a majority of the gains for AlphaGo come actually from algorithmic improvements. So they continue to refine the algorithm. And that's sort of what we can look forward to. Of course, DeepMind is now expanding this sort of core set of technologies to a variety of different domains. If artificial intelligence accelerates the discovery of new know-how, generative AI will democratize the accessibility of AI, which in turn democratizes discovery. What you're seeing here is a still from a movie called The Frost. It's a 12-minute movie completely generated by AI. So still by still, they compiled this movie and wove it together into this 12-minute movie. What's powerful about this, and you saw my Spanish-speaking demonstration yesterday, also generated by generative AI. What's powerful about this is we have now taken the tools of artificial intelligence and made them available to everybody. We can interact with it in natural language, which means the barriers to adoption are much lower. But there's two things that I want to emphasize about this. One, these are pre-trained models, so you don't have to train these models yourself. And they're trained on vast corpora of data. By the way, I learned that word not so long ago. I was looking for the plural of corpus. I learned that's actually corpora and not corpuses, as I thought. This technology allows us to be the directors of our own stories. And I think this democratization, when we unleash the power of this technology across every single person, it has immense promise, but of course also the potential of risk. AI is now what we call a general purpose technology. And I think this shift from being a specialized technology to a general purpose technology is very, very powerful. A specialized technology is a technology that has a single use, like a hammer to punch in a nail. A general purpose technology has multiple uses, and there's a formal definition for what that is. But things like electricity, the internet, these are examples of general purpose technologies that have completely transformed the economy, the nature of business, society, how we live, how we work. AI is now that. It requires three things. One, it has to be a technology that has widespread use. Nobody doubts that. It has to be a technology that is improving all the time. There's no doubt about that. The third one is what I want. The third and last criteria is what I would like to emphasize. There's something called innovational complementarity, and I know that's a mouthful. But an innovational complementarity simply says, you can't just take this technology and plug it into your organization. You have a lot of work to do before you can actually make it useful to you. And that is it's both its opportunity and some of the risk. Because what we have to do in our companies is think about how we deploy this technology and all the surrounding innovations that we have to do internally to make this technology useful. How do we actually deploy, for example, generative AI or AI more broadly? And Mercedes-Benz provides a great example of that. If you saw the research card that I had on the previous slide, it says ChatGPT now integrated into Mercedes. So they have taken one of the first examples of innovational complementarity that I've seen, which is actually putting it into the cars. They have the Hey Mercedes feature already where you can interact with the car. But by adding ChatGPT to it, you expand two things, the interactivity of the conversation that you can have, and to the range of subjects that you can interact with it about. And this is just in the early days of what Mercedes-Benz is doing, and you can imagine really big and more powerful things that they will be able to do. For all of us, the challenge is really how do we leverage not just generative AI, but AI more broadly in our organizations? What are the changes? What are the innovations? What do we do with people? All of these things that we have to do to make the technology pay off. The reason it's so important is because it moves the productivity frontier outwards. What does that mean? The productivity frontier is how much you can produce with the number of people and the machines and the capital equipment that you have in your organization. So the most that you can do, that's on the frontier of productivity. What these technologies do is move that frontier outwards, which means you can do more with the same people you have, and the same capital equipment you have. You can do more with less. You have a whole range of choices, but the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we push the boundaries outwards on what this technology makes possible? If you heard Torsten Slok last night, he talked about this. McKinsey has a report about this, and this is what it says in short. So there's two scenarios they talk about, 22 to 40. What are the productivity gains that we can expect from this technology? And if we do it correctly, the United States is on the far right here, we can add almost 25% improvements in productivity, which is a very large number, by 2040 if we implement this technology relatively quickly. But if we drag our feet about implementing this technology, then the gain drops to 0.6 by 2040. So those are the two alternatives in front of us. If we push hard, we can deliver on massive improvements in productivity and wealth. If we're a little bit slow about it, we can push these gains will occur. This is a question of when. And so all of us need to be thinking about how do we use this technology for good in as short a time period as possible. This, I think, is really important because this is what general purpose technologies demand of us. How do we actually leverage this technology in our own organizations? And there's plenty of evidence that we're doing a pretty good job of it. Now, we are limited a little bit by hardware because we can only go as fast as the fastest computers. But now quantum computing is on its way, and we're soon going to hear from IonQ, publicly traded quantum computing company in the US today, and talking about how he believes that this technology is actually not that far away. So what that really means is that we will see even faster gains in the potential of technology. If we deliver on the promise of technology and the hardware and the promise of algorithmic improvement, software is going to transform the economy and society. We've all driven, and if you've been in a car in San Francisco recently, it's not that unusual to see a self-driving car in your side mirror. I think about the day when the self-driving car looks in the mirror, not that they really can look in the mirror, and sees a human driving a car and saying, what the heck is that thing, right? And I think that's one of the futures we should be thinking about. But as they say, objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. Once this thing achieves critical mass, it is going to explode in use. And we were surprised by the rise, or by the uptick or the uptake, I should say, of generative AI. But if you've been watching that space for a while, it is surprising and it isn't, because you can see the steady improvements that these companies have been making. When you enter the future, everything else seems outdated. So right now it looks like life isn't that different from the way it was yesterday. But you fast forward 10 years, I predict that life is going to look very, very different from the past. And I'm only going to say one word here, Kodak. Kodak was a phenomenal company, but its core competence, its capabilities were chemistry-based, not digital-based. And we've all read the story, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But all the competencies, the capabilities, the skills, the business models that we built to support that kind of company turned out to be obsolete because of the shift in technology. And that is something we all need to think about. How do we reinvent ourselves from the ground up? Because I believe this technology is so profound that we really have to be able to do that. And maybe even us. I love this cartoon, which is, the humans are cheering the only robot walking in a Labor Day parade, right? And this is the real challenge that we face. I think that the chief human resource officers in this room and everywhere else have one of the biggest challenges that any of us have, even including technologists who have a pretty difficult set of challenges. Because how do we think about the redesign of work in a fair, in an equitable way, and yet have our companies be profitable? So let me pivot to what do I think we should do if you are to sort of think about your leadership agenda for 2024. So first, it's important to remember that at the end of the day, every business succeeds only when it has a unique competitive advantage. It has to be a differentiated company. But having said that, let's walk through some things about steps we must take to ensure our competitiveness and why we must change what it is we do, even in technology. So the first thing I will say is we have to recode our sense of value. The way you think you deliver value to your customers is not enough. We can do so much more with the technology today. So we have to think really hard about how can we push on this productivity frontier? How can we deliver more to our customers? How can we improve our customer value proposition? This is an example from a company called IQVIA that calls itself a connected intelligence company in the healthcare space. And what they basically do is this. So when somebody goes into a doctor's office or goes into an emergency room, which is the more important use case, doctors can look at all the data in the electronic health record. You remember how long it actually took us to put electronic health records in place. But one of the most important determinants of the success of your treatment and your diagnosis is what about your social status? And there's something called the social determinants of health, which are equally important, if not more important, than your actual healthcare status. So are you disabled? Do you live by yourself? Can you drive? All kinds of, do you have other factors that determine sort of your access to healthy foods? These are hugely important, and the electronic health records, the structured passive parts of the electronic health record don't capture these. But it turns out that these are captured by doctors every single day. But they just put them in the notes section. They actually don't put them in the structured part of the record. So now with AI, you can actually analyze all of this data. So when the patient is wheeled into the emergency room, the doctors immediately know what this person's conditions are outside health. And it turns out that there is a huge difference in what you can do if you know this versus not knowing this. To give you sort of the stark point, at a hospital in Chicago, the difference in life expectancy between two zip codes that are in its geographical area is 22 years. Think about that, 22 years for the same hospital, two different zip codes in that same geography. That makes treatments very, very different. This is something that I think really needs to be emphasized. We have to think differently about how we invest in competitive advantage. I started by saying that artificial intelligence accelerates discovery and generative AI democratizes discovery. What this is basically saying is we have to, software has been used to automate, and automation has brought huge value. We've codified know-how, we've put it into software, we've scaled it. Now what we need to do is, where is the next competitive advantage going to come from? And I'm going to posit it comes from know-how. And we have to use this technology to develop new know-how so we can build better products, better services, better business models, augment our workers, all of these things. So it starts, though, with focusing on discovery. So redirect your investment to what makes you different through the investment in the discovery of new knowledge. And yes, Taylor Swift. You might be asking, what does Taylor Swift have to do with this conference? But in her Eras tour, she actually plays hits from every single era. She started in country, then went to pop rock, then rock. She even does electronic, I'm told. Like most other musicians will actually, live performers will actually just promote their current record. She plays her entire catalog, through songs from her entire catalog. And when I read this, I said, oh, this reminds me of what a CDO or a CIO or a CTO's challenge. Because I don't think there's a company in this room that doesn't have technology from the first day you started work at that company. We still got COBOL code running around. So you've got data, you've got stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. And so like Taylor, I can't believe I'm using this metaphor, we have to not throw away the software that we have. We have to fix it. We still have, valuable software that are our past hits. The integration challenge is a lot harder for CDOs than it is for Taylor. I'll say that. But I think this is important. But this stack is cumulative. Software is very cumulative. So AI is a layer that sits on top of a data architecture, that sits on top of a technology stack. We have to think about all of this. And we have to recode work. Work is never going to be the same. We have to race with machines. There's two sort of choices about this. One is you can augment workers and you can automate workers. When you augment workers, you make them more capable. when you automate workers, you take something that somebody is invested in for the duration of their career and make it obsolete really fast, right? And so we have to think very carefully about this challenge. And there will be some of both, without a doubt. But we have to find the right balance so that we don't cause the mass disruptions in the economy that we have seen in the past and represented in the strikes in Hollywood and auto workers and so on. And then you have to recode culture. I was talking to James Philbin, who's reading right here, who's going to come up on stage in a few minutes. I was blown away by all this stuff about what a software-driven car can really do. And James, as head of AI and autonomy, is building all these fantastic features. But I was sort of struck by a different of what he was talking about, which is the culture you need to build these AI systems is completely different from the culture of the traditional software world. Because AI is much more a mindset of experimentation than it is of predictability and software engineering. So we'll hear much more from him, but it's going to take a massive cultural shift in sort of how we do this. Because, like we said, this is no longer the domain of just the technologists. It is the domain of everybody in your organization as the technology gets democratized. So we have to think about how do we instill this culture of learning and experimentation across our organizations. And I don't want to leave without sort of talking about a couple of risks, some of the significant risks. So this is a scene from the movie Ex Machina, where a software developer is hired by his CEO to actually be the Turing test for the robot. Is this robot really a robot, or is this robot a human? And can you detect this? And spoiler alert, I'm going to jump to the end of the movie, because this robot has a persona. The programmer falls in love with the robot, I think, and this thing plays out. And at the end, the only thing left standing, I don't want to say the only person left standing, is the robot. Because she deceives them, and they're both dead, and here she survives, right? And there is a very real risk of extinction by AI. If you talked, and I've interviewed a lot of people about this, it may be in the future, but a lot of the top artificial intelligence academics, scientists, industry are all talking about this possibility. Hopefully it is a low probability event, but we do have to take this very, very seriously, because there are unpredictable consequences. If you talk to some of these folks, they talk about, we are trying to solve the problem of intelligence, whatever that means, and then we're going to apply the solution to all kinds of domains. And that is when we lose control, because what happens when these machines actually get smarter than us? Now, I'm not saying this is happening tomorrow, but it's something that is clearly on some sort of technology path. We determine our future. It is not technology that determines our future. We have to make explicit choices, and I literally mean every single one of us in this room, because we are the ones who are going to be deploying technology in our organization. So we need to really think hard about the kind of future we want for ourselves and our children. It is a very important set of decisions that we have to make sure that we get to the utopia and not the dystopia that some people like to talk about. I want to close with this. There is a tremendous leadership premium right now, by which I mean the ability of leaders to impact the world and their companies has never been greater. As we put these technologies into place, we have to think really hard about the leaders who are ultimately going to make these decisions. So like I said, we all have a role to play, but at the end of the day, we recognize it's the leaders in corporate America, in government, in academia, who are going to be making very fundamental decisions about our future. And I think it behooves us all to sort of increase sort of the scope, the frequency, and the impact of these conversations, so that we have a set of well-informed leaders who are making sure that we move forward in a positive direction and realize the promise of AI and not the peril. With that, I continue to remain very optimistic of what we can achieve, but this is a very consequential time in our history. Some have even called it the Oppenheimer moment. So let's make some good decisions and move this country and our companies forward, and I wish you well. Thank you so much for your attention.